Russia, maybe state and non-state actors, are clearly developed their ecosystem of information influence in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the French-speaking part of the continent. We can divide this ecosystem into three main actors. The first one are RT and Sputnik, the main state-sponsored transnational Russian media that are clearly trying to find new audiences in Sub-Saharan Africa after the ban within the European Union. You have also a second type of actor, which are the ecosystem of the so-called Prigozhin's galaxy, who are actors related to the Wagner Group and especially to its civilian and informational division, which is also very active both in the countries where the Wagner Group is deployed, like the Central African Republic or Mali, but also in the information spaces of other African countries like Burkina Faso, for example. And you have a third type of actors, which are actually third-party African actors, may it be journalists, political activists, economic actors who, for different reasons, lucrative, militant, ideological reasons, are going to cooperate with Russian actors, both to defend their own interests, but also, to participate to the legitimation of the Russian presence in this region. There are two major trends that should be presented. The first one is that the Russian actors have clearly understood that to be effective, they need to integrate into broader and local ecosystems. So it's really important to understand that analyzing Russian information influence in this region alone is not sufficient, because they really rely on various third-party actors. They create local radio that they fund, they cooperate with various kind of media, sometimes they corrupt even journalists. So you need to have a really broader and extensive view of this ecosystem. And the second aspect, which is really new actually, is a tendency to produce a new kind of very effective narrative, which is the updating of the old narrative of the Soviet support to decolonization and national liberation movement in the 60s, 70s. And we clearly observe, in parallel with a very strong inflation of this narrative within the political discourse in Moscow, in particular in Putin's discourse, we observe a really strong and frequent practice through which RT, Sputnik, the Prigozhin's galaxy rely and produce an anti-neo-colonial narrative to seduce local audiences and to also explain that Russia has never been a colonial power in Africa, of course, in contrary to European countries, which is extremely paradoxical, of course, at a time where Russia is conducted a neo-colonial and neo-imperial war within Ukraine. I think that what's interesting with the Russian practices is that they really are successful in combining a very short-term tactical production of discourses, for example, to criticize a specific Western or international actor within a specific country, with a strategic narrative like the anti-neo-colonial narrative that is pushed every day and that have a very strong historical resonance within African societies, and which also is a narrative that pre-exists within African societies, who have, of course, their own agentivity in this ecosystem. And if I compare with what several European countries do when it comes to communicating with African societies, I think that this combination of two kind of narratives, especially the use of a strategic long-term narrative to explain what is the role of France, the UK, Germany, I don't know, within African societies, is something that we do not really observe when it comes to strategic communication. The expression I use to qualify the post-Prigozhin era in Africa is a kind of continuity within fragmentation. So what's happening is that we observe a clear attempt by the Russian state to divide the heritage of Prigozhin, may it be in Ukraine or in Africa. But still, we also understand, and this is a kind of difficult equation for them, that they want to keep the flexibility that the Wagner Group and the Prigozhin's galaxy could rely on to act instead of the Russian state, for example, in Africa. And so clearly what we see at the moment is that the apparatus, former centralized apparatus of the Prigozhin's galaxy is fragmented. You can see that, for example, some specific actors related to the Ministry of Defense are trying to hire Wagner mercenaries, etc. But in the same time, and especially in the information space, we clearly observe a continuity, and we can see that several informational assets that belong to the LARTA project and the Internet Research Agency, especially the Africa back office, which is the part of the LARTA project that is devoted to African audiences. These assets are actually still active, and even after the death of Prigozhin, we could observe that some of them were not active anymore, but for a few weeks now, they have started again to produce many contents, both to legitimate the Russian presence or to very strongly disparage the presence of other actors like France, like the different United Nations missions, for example, in Africa, etc. I think that the fact of being offensive in the information space is something that liberal democracies can completely endorse and accept, because of course we cannot keep watching these different authoritarian regimes being very aggressive in this particular space without doing nothing. Still, we need to keep in mind that we can be offensive also by saying the truth. And in this regard, for example, if you take the African regional context and the expansion of the Russian presence in this region, it could be, for example, useful to document, communicate on the various war crimes that have been committed by the Wagner Group within these societies. It could be also explained that Russia has actually also, in fact, a neo-colonial and an effective neo-colonial agenda, especially in what they call the so-called near abroad in his neighborhood. And so these are, for example, kind of narratives that several Western countries could develop or rely on to be also offensive, to defend themselves by keeping their main principle in the information space and in terms of media freedom or production of information.